All right. Well, we'll get started this morning on the talk. So the talk today, we're going to kind of combine both talks together today, just because this is a fairly unique project. So I'm going to get started with a word of thanks, and then we're going to get talking about the talk today. Um, Dear God, I'm so thankful for this time that we can have together today. Help us to be able to share what you're doing in a way that we bring glory to you. Help us to be able to see opportunities to live in a way that we can be your hands and feet in this world. We're amazed by you, and help us to stay ever more amazed. Amen. All right. So this is kind of like story time today. Um, I don't know how many projects I've ever worked on or constructed, but I would say it's probably fair to say over the last 20 years, I've probably done about, we've probably built close to about 10 projects a year for construction. So definitely 10, 10, definitely 10 projects, maybe 20. I don't know. So there's been 100 to 200 projects we've constructed over the years. That This project is definitely not the standard protocol, and not anything like other projects we've had in the past, but I want to share it with you. I don't want to share it with you saying, hey, all projects we do go like this, because this was so unique. And really, what the story is, I want to tell you a little bit about kind of what God did through this project, opposed to, and what he's still doing, opposed to what what we did. So it'll be framed a little bit differently. So we presented this back in August 2nd of this year, and this was basically a dream that we presented for Rochester University, a Clinton River move. So we're going to follow up on this. Some of the slides will look fairly similar, just so it's kind of consistent. Other slides will look different. So I'm going to take this back to 2006, and Brad, you'll probably remember some of these ideas. But in 2006, I was working for Stantec Consultant in Raleigh, North Carolina. Brad, you were my boss, of course, and I was in this weird relationship with North Carolina State University, where I was still kind of working with North Carolina State University, but I was working for Stantec, and we hired a guy named Mike Keenan on, and Mike, the whole purpose was he was going to do 3D channel design and be somebody that we could really invest a lot into, because some of the other guys that we had at the time just weren't quite at a point where they seemed like they were going to be able to get a whole lot invested. So through a series of events, we were doing work with North Carolina State University and Stantec at the same time. And I had these prayers at this time for kind of, what am I doing here in the consulting world? It seems kind of greasy and slimy. Do I really want to be in the consulting world? At the same time, I had prayers about, okay, well, my mom had told me earlier, well, you know what you do playing in creeks and mud puddles, that seems pretty neat. I guess that's a pretty neat job if you don't care about anything eternal. So I had all these prayers about kind of where my place was in this world. And, I had new friends, Brad Fairley, I had this guy, Mike Keenan, that was a new friend, and just how I interacted with these people. And I remember these being very distinct prayers, as well as the prayer of a lie that I had to Greg Jennings, where we created a brake line program and kind of, oh, help me. Nevertheless, in this time period in my life, Greg Jennings recommended me, because he didn't want to travel to Michigan, to a friend of his named Chris Farber that he met through a Rosgan training course back in 1997. And Chris Farber was a guy that worked for the state of Michigan. And Greg said, hey, why don't you go up there and present on their stream team and present 3D natural channel design to the Michigan stream team. So that's what I did. And at the time, Mike Ian was going through some really crazy things with his father's health. And through a series of events, Brad Fairley had a project that we were working on with Pfizer's campus in Ann Arbor. And it kind of allowed us to make this marketing business development trip to Michigan. Mike could see his father, and we could talk to the Michigan stream team, and we stayed at Mike's house and drove Mike's parents' vehicles. So it's just kind of all these weird things that tied together at the time. And, Stantec allowed us the freedom to go there and gave us some funds to fly there. And Mike's family helped us out a bunch in going there. And we figured that, hey, this is going to move forward. We're going to get work in Michigan, and Mike's going to be able to move back to Michigan to be around his parents. In 2007, the Millers Creek project on the Pfizer's campus was terminated indefinitely. They just closed down the campus. So that project was kind of gone, and we weren't really moving forward with things. There was a kind of this prayer to kind of help out Mike with things. And then in 2008, Mike's dad passed away. So sometimes we're tempted to think of our prayers as not being answered for one reason or another, and we don't like to think of them as a weight or what can happen next. We want to think of them as, okay, well, God, this is what I saw that you were going to do in my mind, and you didn't do it, and that means you didn't answer it. But what I wanted to share with you is kind of ideas of God's faithfulness this week related to this project. So 2008 to 2020, Mike Keenan developed working relationships through Stantec and other friends with Chris Freiberger, Pat Durick, and many others at the state of Michigan. This was through Stantec, Green Watershed Restoration. North State Environmental went out there and did a demonstration projects, which really helped Mike gain experience. And Mike asked me, do you want to work in Michigan? At this time, I'd moved to Colorado. And I said, no, I don't want to work in Michigan, because Michigan has the same summer as Colorado has, and I want to be near my family and not in Michigan. But I said, but I'm willing to support you. And really what Mike heard at the time was, no, I don't want to work in Michigan. And in talking to Mike more recently, he really felt like it was like, hey, Mike, I don't really want to help you out type of thing. Even though I said, well, I'll support you. But there's this idea that, hey, I don't want to work in Michigan. And sometimes it's the way we phrase things more than anything else, in how we sometimes sharing God's love with people is being willing to have communication instead of bluntly coming back in a way that other people aren't able to hear what we're saying. But I remember having prayers for business relationships and really this idea of place in the world, So, okay, well, what am I doing here? Well, do I want to work in Michigan? Do I not want to work in Michigan? Does our business want to work in Michigan? It's hard to get licensed in Michigan. And I remember these prayers, and this was kind of 2008 to 2020. And I'd worked for 3 companies in that time frame. So a lot of things were changing. In April 2021, Mike Keenan had done some work where he helped out a friend of his, Chris Freiberger, do some concept designs, and it was appreciated. And there was some end of the year funding for the Great Lakes Commission. Chris Farber had moved from the state of Michigan to the Great Lakes Commission, and this is a pretty old relationship. And Mike has helped out Chris a lot of times on things. And Chris was like, "Hey, we got a little bit of end of the year funding. I want to look at Fish Passage and Lamprey Passage, which we shared a couple of weeks ago. And I'm going to put together a proposal. You'll have to put together a proposal, but I really want you to win it, but I can't guarantee you can win it." So we put together a proposal, and Mike was sure enough on work that he really wanted to make sure he won this proposal. And he came to me and said, "Hey, I know you don't want to work in Michigan, but do you want to, would you be willing to help me on this proposal?" And it's kind of funny because I didn't really remember the whole details of saying I didn't want to work in Michigan, but it was obviously memorable to him. And he goes, "Well, do you want to work in Michigan with me on this?" And I said, "Well, yes, of course I'll support you." And probably there wasn't a whole lot of difference of how I wanted to work in Michigan, but there's a difference in how I communicated it. So we were already traveling that summer. We had a planned trip that we were going to be going to Pennsylvania by way of southern Colorado, Texas. So we figured Michigan might be on the way. So we figured we'd just drive up through Michigan on the way to Pennsylvania. And our prayer at that time was for obedience and loving others. And, we just wanted to be obedient. We had an opportunity of purchasing a church camp and creating a fly links course, which was something that we thought, well, hey, God, if you want to use us for this, we want to be available. We had an opportunity to do a 2-week missions opportunity in Uganda with the orphanage over there. We're like, God, if you want us to be a part of this, we want to be obedient. And then we're also currently still looking at the idea of how do we operate our business as a mission where we can be the hands and feet of God in this world, that the world just can't believe that people will want to be the hands and feet of Christ in this world. So those are things that we looked at, and these are our prayers for obedience at this time. And I would say that sometimes God listens to our prayers. He answers our prayers, but sometimes the way we pray helps us realize and see what God's doing, opposed to when we're praying about the things that we think we need or our place in the world. Sometimes it's just, let us be obedient. I want to be obedient. I don't know what that means, but I want to be obedient. So Clinton River, in July 2021, we went out there to look at this Yates Mill Pond Dam on the Clinton River for lamprey passage, or barrier for lamprey and fish passage, and trying to keep lamprey not to pass and fish to pass when lamprey end up attaching to fish is quite a complicated issue. So we went out there to look at this, but there probably really wasn't enough funds for me to be there for the time that I was planning on being there. And Mike and Chris had arranged some other watershed tours and other things for me to do, because it was really only like a one-day thing. But they're like, hey, we'll do a watershed tour. And we didn't know what was going to come out of this watershed tour. And we looked at the Clinton River upstream of the mill dam, and then we looked at all these old projects that were stabilization, some restoration projects. And we were in the county, Oakland County, Michigan, and Mike was kind of leading the tour with Chris Freiberger. And we walked on July 14th and saw this bank, and this was a eroding cliff bank. This is in a glacial sand deposit that was eroding up against this building. We didn't know what this building was, as we shared before, but we figured, well, that looks pretty bad. It looks like a high sediment load, and from the way that we looked at it, it looked like we were only 40 feet from the foundation of that building. We thought that might be a concern. So, like, well, maybe we should try to stabilize this. So that night, went back, and after having them be on the watershed tour, I was like, you know what, maybe we can find out who owns this building and what the purpose of this building is, and maybe we can figure out something that can be done, and maybe find a little bit of funding. And I wasn't sure what to do, but this was the one big memory of the day in the field of, oh, wow, that looks horrible. So, and part of this was trying to get Mike some support. He had a desire to potentially move back to Michigan and start a business back in Michigan. And I thought that was kind of neat. And we had some other things going on. We thought we'd be moving back to Pennsylvania on July 15th, possibly to buy a camp in Pennsylvania. And the thought was, what could be done? So we looked into it, and it was easy to find from Oakland County's website. The owner was Rochester University. They owned 75 acres right next to the river. So they were a big landowner. And they were an educational university. They're a small Christian-based college that focuses on education and sports, which is very odd. And the purpose of the building was, it was an old dormitory. So we ended up looking into this a little bit more. And that night, what was on my mind was I started looking at, okay, well, where do we need to realign the river? And then we saw some stuff upstream, and we saw some other projects, and we started realizing that we're creating a lot of Oxbows. And this kind of added into the concept of, well, they already had 3 Oxbows that were created on this property from when the Clinton River Trail, which was historically a railroad, cut off the river. So they already kind of had some Oxbows, and we were going to look to create some more Oxbows. So this concept of fishing links came back to us from a project that we were doing in Pennsylvania that we were actually driving east to take a look at. And the fishing links was this concept of fly fishing golf, if you will. So there was a high terrace in here. You can see by the shading of the green, basically the building, Palmer Hall sits on the top of that green. And there was this kind of this weird glacial formation where the river had a high meander, right? And then it ended up getting cut off by the railroad. So on the morning of July 15th, I sent a cold call email to Rochester University. I just found a science professor and said, maybe if anybody cares about this, would be the science professor. I didn't know who else to do. So we sent this KMZ file from Google Earth that we created overnight, and we sent it, copied Mike on it, and basically I said, hey, my name's David. I'm doing an assessment on the Clinton River yesterday and noticed that Rochester University has a building about 40 feet on a road and terrace slope from the Clinton River. I'd like to talk to you ASAP about stabilizing this bank through natural river restoration processes. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. I believe we have a team that God has allowed to cross paths with Rochester University for a plan and purpose. I have a simple bank stabilization project. I have an idea for a simple bank stabilization project, but I have an idea for a more complicated fisheries fly links course to fund the restoration, combined with river shared training taught at RU. Attached is a rough Google Earth idea. So essentially we said, well, maybe we could start doing some training courses through here. And my thought was, well, we're going to do some training courses in Pennsylvania. Why not do some other training courses later here as well? So that morning I'm on a phone call with Tom Rellinger. This message went to the science professor. The science professor sent it up the chain. And by 10 o'clock in the morning, I was on the phone call with Tom Rellinger, who was the dean, CEO, and the head of Rochester University. This was a project they've been looking at for 10 to 20 years. This dormitory, Tom had actually stayed in when he was an undergraduate at this university back in 1972. He had, at that time, this dormitory had about 150 feet until it got to the top of a bank, enough room that they used to play football in the backyard of this dormitory. So we started talking to Tom about this, and he started sharing what he wanted to do with the property. That afternoon, I got a phone call from the realtor that we were dealing with the Hartman Center church camp in Pennsylvania. And we had this dream of doing this fly links course and river shared training there. And they said they had an offer on the property and we should no longer proceed with the project, with buying the Hartman Center property. And I think of that, the prayers that we had related to the Hartman Center property, whether that's truly away or whether it's just on pause, I think it's amazing how God sometimes gives us so much mercy that he presents something to us even when he doesn't need to, before we get let down on something that we thought was going to go the way that we wanted it to go, or we thought that God was going to take it in a different way. So it was pretty merciful to me that God was this timing was this exact. It kind of already presented an idea right before another idea went away, or a dream. And like I'd said before, a dream's just a call to worship anyways, but sometimes it's hard for me to remind myself of that. Sometimes these dreams become real and I think, okay, well, this is the way we got to go. Anyways, fly links. We presented this. Max Linder presented this on June 7th. And essentially, this is part fly fishing and part golf. This is a concept that Kurt Richardson of Otterbox Corporation and Blue Ocean's nonprofits, Otter Cares, had brought up to me one of his properties in Colorado, Wyoming line that he wanted to use for missional development and funding. So the idea is, let's create a new sport that combines fly fishing and just regular fishing with concepts of golf, and in that sense promote native fisheries, native habitats, and even create new tackle, create new methods of fishing that aren't there yet. So we want this to be something that's sustainable. And like I said, this was an idea that came, my friend Kurt said that this is a gift, this was an idea he had from God, and I believe that it was, and I believe it's a gift from God that he shared with us. His project in Colorado and Wyoming that he wanted to build this on went away because he did not like the conditions that it was going to require to do this. I think that's a key thing I want to say is sometimes God presents things in front of us and we think, hey, this is a neat idea. This is going to happen. and God is preparing us for something different. And it's God's still faithful, God's still good, but just because I don't understand God doesn't mean that God's not faithful or good. So fly links, the idea is that it will have no negative impact. It could actually fit into any restoration scheme because it's going to be a happy ecosystem with no footprints. And we can basically encourage native fisheries as well as sport fisheries, but create new tackle, new ways of fishing for things like a mottled scalping, which is a really cool fish. We could create a casting, we could create a fishing rod, a bamboo rod with a casting net on the end of it to be able to catch these small fish that you generally don't catch, and create a sport out of a native species that doesn't exist. So we were looking at doing this on the Hartman Center property, and it was pretty amazing because this property just showed itself as almost a better situation for fly links than Hartman Center because the ponds and oxbows were already there. The anthropogenic manipulation had already occurred. There was already an educational facility that was paying its bills, that was financially secure, that was on there and already looking to train people. So that same week, we talked about this idea of ecclesiastic restoration, which is essentially the idea of how can we restore the church? What does the church look like in the future? Does it have to be a silly building with a steeple, or is the church so much bigger than this? And at the same time, Rochester University is thinking about what does it look like to be a church to the community, not a church that people walk in on Sundays, but a church that people can walk in whenever, and they can be a part of this community through Rochester University. One of the things that they did, which is so awkward and odd to me, is they have one of the largest per capita sports programs of any Christian university I've ever seen, or maybe of any university I've ever seen. 65% of all their students are on scholarship, athletic scholarships. That's pretty wild. And I asked Tom, I said, this seems silly for a Christian university. He's the dean, and he goes, well, this is just our mission. He's like, we can bring kids in that are far from God on an athletic scholarship, and we can teach them what it means to be able to incorporate God into different aspects of your life. And he's like, and whatever they do when they leave is up to them, but it just is our way of being able to reach out to people. It's our well, if you will, from the story of the woman at the well, where the woman came to get water, and Christ was standing there and said, I can, you came for water, but I am the living water. If you drink of me, you'll never be thirsty again. So this is kind of something that Rochester University was already looking at. So they already have so many sports in their university. For them to add one more sport and be able to teach people what that sport means is a really neat fit. It's one of these things that I could have never imagined there'd be this little university in Michigan that would be interested in doing this. So July 16th, I went out, I measured the bank, 29.1 feet. I told them in the email 40 feet away. It was 29.1 feet from the Palmer Hall dormitory. They had all these things down the floodplain. This is where the historic river was, and it was cut off by the railroad before the railroad was changed to rails to trails, to the Clinton River Trail. So it has this outreach center and just a really neat location where we could tie in something like an educational fly links course too. The bank location, 1999, ended up having about 40 foot of bank erosion in 22 years. So we looked at this and said, well, we're going to have about 2 feet of bank erosion a year. But then when we looked at the bank and saw the erodibility of it, we told them, you could have as much as 20 feet. Sorry, you could have as much as 10 feet per year, and you only have about 30 feet left. So you probably don't have more than about 3 years. And we started showing the alignment of the river from different times. And since then, we've actually found the alignment of the river from 1963 and 1940. Then we were kind of surprised. 1 week later, they lost 5 foot of bank in one storm. And this has been a very wet year for the university. So we went from being at 29 feet to being right about 24 feet. And then we had a couple other storms. So by the time we finally got out to construction, we were less than 20 feet from the bank is where the erosion was taking place at. And that's pretty wild. And so basically, yeah, well, that's actually what a lot of people said is, hey, let's put a sheet pile down there. But we didn't even have room to put in a sheet pile. And if we had to put in a sheet pile with the room we had, the cost of the project would have been enormous. But yes, that was definitely mentioned. So we had we went for an emergency stabilization project, but this was going to require a move of the river, which just seems so odd to everybody. And with that emergency stabilization, generally they accept a lot of things, but because we were willing to do natural channel design, emergency stabilization, everybody in the state was very excited. North State Environmental, Stantec Consultant, Mike Keenan, Green Watershed Restoration, the Great Lakes Commission have been pushing concepts of natural channel design in the watershed for years. And this one being one where we can push the river and move it was very intriguing to people. So it helped with the permitting process. But the general concept was just a simple 400-foot realignment project. And we're going to leave an Oxbow because we didn't have enough material that we could generate by moving the river because of this high bank to fill in the old bank. So we were going to move the channel away. And we told them all along, you won't have enough material to fill in up to the top of Palmer Hall, but at least, you'll have the river moved away from Palmer Hall. This location is really, really close to where the river was in 1960. So we had aerial photography from 1960, and we're essentially putting it back to 1960. Now, part of the reasons why we're having problems is that the bridge on the rail trail at Station Zero, that was constricted. The trail was built up on both sides, and it used to be that you'd have high flows that would cut across on the left bank of the river and bypass the old railroad bridge. Now it ends up being that it all gets pushed right underneath that bridge. So that accelerated the erosion. The city of Rochester was kind of at fault for that, and the university knew it, but they never really pushed the city of Rochester. They always believed that it was better to have friends with the city of Rochester than to say, hey, you guys really messed up our bank and caused higher bank erosions. And in fact, one of the guys working on for the university is a guy named James, and James used to be the city engineer for the city of Rochester. So really close ties to the local municipality were very helpful in the project too. So we called for tow wood, a boulder constructed riffle. And so this is kind of what it looked like. In August, September, we reached out to Friends for Assistance. We called Resource Institute, North State Environmental, Chad Crandall, a local contractor, and River Shared, and said, hey, how can we make this in? Is it possible that we can get help for this or find funds? Mike started the LEAP permitting process at risk without a contract. And just we knew that this thing was getting a lot of bank erosion, and we didn't want to wait and see what happened. So Mike ended up starting the permit, and I started assisting him. We had site visits in early September. We taught some courses with the science department in early September because I had a busted truck I had to go get. We met up with a local contractor who gave us a quote. His quote was about $50,000 over the estimate that we had without any kind of permitting or design fees. So it ended up being about somewhere around $70,000 over the estimate that we had given the Rochester University. We had a friend that we had trained in a training course in Oklahoma years ago who lived in Arkansas, and he'd been a friend that Mike had continued relationships with. And he just so happened to talk to him that day on the phone about a different project. And John Chapman in Flow State said, well, I have a little bit of availability in early October. So we worked with him for a bid, and he was able to bring in the bid just under the engineer's estimate. And it was sent to everybody on September 6th, 2021. The agreement was signed by Rochester University and Flow State on September 13th, 2021. The state of Michigan, Mike Keenan, and Rochester University continued to do some classes and have people come out and look at the banks and do some training courses there in September. The permit was approved on September 30th, 2021. And that gave us plenty of time to be in construction and mobilize on October 4th. So we were mobilized on October 4th for construction. We didn't know where housing was going to be, whether we had to get a house rental, but it ended up being that they had COVID housing on site and none of their students were in COVID solitary. So it ended up being that we could stay in the COVID housing. Dormitory opened up, so we stayed right on site. Access was very difficult because of the high bank and the high terrace, but we decided to try access on the greenway, and we ended up being able to have access of all of our equipment and all of the rocks in the greenway, even backing up a rock train, which is a double trailered semi truck back a tiny, narrow greenway. So it was pretty amazing the amount of prayers that we had with related to COVID housing, backing up rock trucks down greenways, bringing equipment down greenways. The trees and high banks that we're working on, very steep banks, trying to take down trees in very tight areas. Then we had rain, and then we had rain, and then we had rain. For the first week of construction, we had rain every single day, and we had a flood the one day on October 8th during the middle of construction. We ended up having a bank full plus discharge on the site. We figured that it was close to 1,100 CFS. Our bank full discharge was 900 CFS. We had a gauge upstream and downstream to give us an idea of what it was. And then at the end of construction, we had told everybody, hey, you're not going to be able to fill in that bank completely. And we knew that, in time, God was going to create opportunities to fill in that bank and he could do whatever he wanted to do. The last day of construction, I already left the site, and somebody from the city of Rochester Hills comes in and says, hey, we saw you were having a project and we have 1,500 yards of material we need to get rid of. The day earlier, I told the dean, hey, you're going to probably need about 1,500 yards in the next couple of years and just back it up slowly. And he goes, well, we're going to have to take out a trailway and we're going to bust up a walkway because backing trucks down there. I said, well, you just have to put it back. Well, the city came out and said, we need to get rid of this material before snow comes on the ground. Can we come out and dump it here? And they said, we can be out there tomorrow and dump it, which is amazing. And they said, well, we're probably going to bust up your walkway, your sidewalk. We'll just repair it for you. It's amazing to me to kind of watch how God can build relationships, experiences. And it's not that we don't do anything. It's that God doesn't need us to do anything. But sometimes when we're obedient, he allows us to be a part of his plan, and then we get to see what God's doing. So I'm going to show you some pictures here. First day construction was Monday, the 4th. We had big issues with setting up control for survey grade GPS. John had brought his Sokia base, and we had Trimble equipment. And we were told, hey, this would work, but it didn't work enough. So the first 2 days we worked with basically a half-rate operator in the excavator that didn't really know what he was doing. And we worked with a dozer, but we couldn't use all the equipment because we couldn't get the GPS material working. But we had prayers about, okay, well, God, we know you're in control. We got enough time. Help us to have patience. Thursday, we had to realign and move the river. That was a very scary day because the flows were high because there'd been rain the whole time. And we were just trying to push enough material to put in a plug. And we didn't want to lose the material because we're already short material. So a lot of prayers from the bridge, a lot of talking to people as they went by. And we had so many people come by the Greenway, just watch us, people from the university, people not from the university. We had opportunities to pray with people from the community about the project. As we shared what was happening here, it was noticeable or not noticeable if they'd be open to kind of the idea of prayer. And then some people were and other people weren't. And we were able to share everything with the people as they came by. Actually, us sharing with people on the bridge about the construction project is where the 1,500 yards of material came from. One of the guys ended up saying, hey, I saw somebody was talking to me about this project and we have to get rid of some material. Can we use it here? And it's because of people walking around and using this trail and just folks on the construction crew being willing enough to talk to everybody and when given the chance to pray with people about the project. That's pretty amazing. So we had moved the river, and like I said, it was pretty scary condition. We had this big plug in, but we haven't had towwood in yet, and we had a couple of trees we were trying to save, but really only about 1 or 2 trees because we were moving a lot of material. And we were adjusting. This is a theater section on this high terrace, and they go up and they do Shakespeare in the park and that type of stuff. So it's the Thespian Center. But we were completely regrading this area of the bank just because we needed material. So trying to find ways to reset walkways and trails so that we could just generate more material to push up against the bank and get things stabilized. But in the time during the construction, Mike brought Chris Freiberger and other people from the state of Michigan out to look at the project. They volunteered their time, the personal time. Chris Freiberger and Pat Durek were out doing seed and matting with us. It's pretty amazing. The person that approved the permit came out to do seed and matting with us on this project. That's a pretty amazing relationship that Mike had developed. On Friday, we were thinking things are moving pretty good. We have the one pretty tree. Tom, the CEO of and Dean, love that tree, but we're pushing dirt around. We're feeling pretty confident about it. And then on Friday night, we got 6 inches of rainfall, 6 inch per hour intensity rainfall, and we ended up getting about 4 inches of rainfall in less than an hour. And then we ended up having, I think, 6 inches total in that time. But we had a bank full plus discharge that came through the property, came through the project, and it took down the tree, that the one tree we remained, which is an amazing gift for us. We thought that tree was there. We didn't move it. We didn't hit it, but we adjusted the bank. And what an amazing blessing to have that tree come down while we're still there, opposed to 3 weeks after construction when we thought it was going to still be there. So we incorporated it into the bank. We continued to do construction and pushed a lot of material and got everything cleaned up from the storm. We were blessed by the fact that the storm didn't hurt much. We were able to be out there at 2:00 in the morning watching the back eddies for the discharge. We wanted to run a 2-dimensional flow model. We were concerned about kind of right about the time when bankful flows come. It made the idea of a 2-dimensional flow model almost unneeded because we could see this big back eddy that formed in this ineffective flow area up against the bank. So the idea of, hey, is there going to be a high steep slope that comes over that's going to actually cut into this bank at high flows that we're missing, or is it going to be a back eddy? We were going to model it with a friend named John, and he had volunteered to model it for free out of Alabama, but we didn't need to after that. We looked at the flows at 2:00 in the morning at the flow depths, and it was very obvious that it was a back eddy. We wouldn't have to worry about it. So we got done with construction on Tuesday the 12th. We had a meeting. We had a supper as a fun supper, and we took pictures and we're like, hey, this is a really cool project. Everybody was happy with it. And we all looked at it and said, well, it's kind of a bummer with that bank behind us, that cliff bank. It's stable. It will stay in place, but it's still going to look ugly. And it's going to be a while before the university can find the material to put behind there and the funds, because you're talking $20 to $30 per yard to haul in material and 1,500 yards of material, but then you also have to disturb it somewhere else and move it. And we're talking about a project that's probably $100,000 and getting material down there between doing repairs to the pathway and everything else. So we just looked at it and said, hey, these are some things to manage stormwater in the short term. And then you'll have to just have this be operation and maintenance in the future. And we kind of prayed about it. We were thankful about it. We shared a meal together and everybody was happy. And Tom was excited because this was Tom and James were excited because this was a 20-year process. Come on, come over here. This was a 20-year process where they knew they had to do something, but they couldn't find a way to do it for 10 to 20 years, because when they tried to permit in the past, it just was sheet piles and those types of ideas. And it was just not received well by the state of Michigan. So this is kind of what it looks like, the Thespian area. The people were really excited about that. We put down a bunch of seed and straw. It opened up this area to the river and gave it a new view. We created our first a little additional fly lynx pond through the project, and this will be for different species of fish will be running through there. We're talking to the state of Michigan about putting a sentinel species of one or two key species into this pond and just kind of monitoring it over time. It has an outlet, but we've been talking to the state of Michigan about what that looks like, if we can still use it and control it. And so this is kind of what the project looked like right after construction. So I left, I got on a plane. Mike and I kind of prayed over the project on the way back to the airport, and just kind of a real time of Thanksgiving about how well the project went. By the time I got off the plane in Colorado on Wednesday, I got a phone call from Mike saying, "You wouldn't believe what just happened." And this is the city, Rochester Hills, came out to the site on Wednesday after I left and said, "Hey, we have 1,500 yards of material." Actually, they said, "Hey, we have material we need to place here." So Mike went out and measured it on their yard. It was about 1,500 yards, which was what I shared with somebody else a day or two earlier from Tom. And so they brought out their trucks and they just backed up the trucks, and it was set up so they could just back the material down the hill, and we could have a dozer there to push it. And we were able to reshape the bank. We had enough room so we could get the dozer to the top of the bank, which wasn't a short feat in itself. And we were able to reshape the entire bank. And this is kind of what the project looked like at the end. So the whole bank has been kind of reshaped now. Now, a couple of things that we've seen since then is we were able to fill that in with the design, but we still have this concept, this idea of a fly links course that we'd like to do in the future. And this has continued on. And, we had talked back in August about, hey, what's the next steps? Well, those next steps are now kind of done, which is amazing. And God showed up in so many relationships, experiences, in ways that we could have never imagined. The idea of just constant prayer and taking down a widowmaker of a tree, the idea of some things that were near misses, the idea of other things that were just extreme blessings that we never even saw, and a posture of constant prayer on the project. So now the dream that we have is kind of next steps, and that's doing river shared training courses. We had a series of 10 training courses that we were looking at doing through Hartman Center. Well, that may or may not be available anymore, but Rochester University is really excited about the concept of doing training courses, as well as McMaster University in Ontario. So there's ideas of, hey, maybe that prayer was preparing us for different prayers. The Fly Links course, the municipality of Rochester Hills is interested in this, but the Rochester University that themselves have 75 acres, and they're actually willing to go after funds and grant funds and do this Fly Links course just on their own, even if the city of Rochester Hills isn't interested in it. Mitigation for impacts. This bigger project, we're looking at creating a stream mitigation bank in Michigan for the city of Rochester Hills. Stream mitigation there aren't stream mitigation banks in Michigan right now. So this would be kind of a municipality using this as a bank without it being officially a bank. And then we're already in talks with going after 2 319 grants to write a 319 grant. So we're going after 2 grants that will help us write a 319 grant for education demonstration with Rochester University and River Shared about creating a Fly Links course, as well as doing stormwater, BMPs, and water quality management. The River Shared network, we're looking at kind of where we can do some of these other things at, but it amazes me how we can use a dream to worship God on what he could do. And then as long as we keep the focus on worshiping God, sometimes what he does is so far away from what we could have ever imagined. And that's kind of really what I wanted to share with you this week. It amazes me how God can be constantly amazing us. And that's pretty cool. So with that, that's our presentation for this week. And our concepts have kind of developed a little bit more since this. Now we're creating 319 best management practices. We were out there for a big storm rainfall. We were able to walk around with Jacob, who is the maintenance guy in charge of facilities, and we were able to look at stormwater concerns, stormwater flooding, help them use shop vacs to get water out of facilities, understand where water is coming from during big flows. These are all things that if there wasn't a 6 inch per hour rainfall, we would have never been able to share into 319 funding. We talked to the 319 funding. I think one of the neatest ideas of this project is when we told the 319 people what we're doing, they're like, this is an amazing project. It seems like just too much. And I took that as a huge compliment, as in it is too much for us, but it's not too much for God. If this is something that God's going to allow us to be a part of, then we know that God can do it. He's already showed us that he's faithful and he's good to do it. And if it's not something that he's going to be a part of, then we don't need to be a part of it. But I'm excited about where this thing could be going. We're going to continue to move on through River Shared in moving after some 319 funding and through Rochester University. And we'd love to have anybody that has an opportunity to be as involved in this project as they can be. So with that, any questions or thoughts for this week?
That's a great story, Dave. Yeah, it's interesting the twists and turns that you didn't map, nor did the team. But I'd be glad to help out in any capacity. I'll catch up with you guys offline if there's any review or reading or writing or anything I can do for the project. I'd be glad to help.
Yeah, there would be whatever you want to do. We'd love to have you be involved. It just amazes me. And I would honestly say there's so much more that I didn't have time to list in this of kind of where God does. One of the things I didn't share is my friend Matt Stallman, who's on River Shared calls a lot. Matt Stallman texted me right during a high stress level in construction. So we were getting the 6 inches of rainfall a year, 6 inches of rainfall an hour. And I'm watching the soil erosion control ideas that we had in mind not working very well. And I'm concerned about what's going to happen to Toewood that we just placed, because it wasn't, we were within the permit, which means within 2 days after construction, we had to have it seed installed, but it wasn't seed installed. And we were getting a big storm. I was freaking out in my head. And at that exact time, Matt Stallman texted me just about some random thing. And I texted him back. I said, Matt, I need prayers. I said, I just need so many prayers right now about this construction project. And he said, you bet. I talked to him a couple of weeks ago, and Matt Stallman said, that was so neat that you asked me for prayers about the construction project. And he said, that reminds me of when we were on Willow Branch and we were concerned about the failure of the plug on Willow Branch during the high rainfall. And I called you and asked you for prayers, and you prayed for me. What's amazing to me is I didn't even remember that, but yet God used those two opportunities for us to be able to strengthen and sharpen each other's faith. And that's pretty amazing to me. So I think that sometimes we don't want to give everything to God. We want to hold some things back from God because we think we should know how to do something. And I want to tell you that I don't know how to do anything in river restoration apart from God. And that doesn't mean that I think I'm horrible at river restoration. That just means that I can't do this stuff apart from God. And God allows us to do what we do, or he ordains what we do. And this one, a lot of times I can say kind of, oh yeah, God allows us to do what we do. This one I can say that God guided us and he ordained what we did on this project. It's a neat opportunity. I hope we get a lot more like this. I know the hearts of a couple of you guys on the line, and I know that these are things that are exciting to us. So, all right. Well, before we close, I'm going to close in a quick prayer, but we're going to watch a video while I close in this prayer. So, and this is basically a video of the Rochester project. All right, here we go. Dear God, we're thankful for these opportunities, and help us to just see you and see what you're doing and be thankful for what you allow us to be a part of. Please be with everybody this week and help us to love others and love you. Amen. So if you watch here, this is the before and after, and then you'll be able to see a camera that was set up on the banks for the entire construction. This link is in the PowerPoint presentation that I'll be sending out today. So you'll be able to look at it in the future or share it with somebody else if you want to. All right. Well, hey guys, have a great week.
We'll talk to you later. Thank you.
See you, Rich.